Friends, thanks for joining us again, and you are here in the parlor with us. Of course, you know Scott Duran, Pastor Scott, Pastor Ryan, you've seen him now. And today we have a very special guest, Mr. Samuel Johnson. Samuel, you are a student, a law student at Liberty, and a member of a congregation that's sort of in our fellowship of friends, so we welcome him here, and he's going to provide some insight, some of his knowledge. He's a very brilliant man, and I look forward to hearing what he can share with us.
The document came out, and it's bringing up about Roe versus Wade, and the one side of the political field is saying that all these conservative justices lied, and they want to claim that the wool was pulled over their eyes. They lied. They're going back on their word to uphold Roe versus Wade. Where, when you really read their statements, they were talking about they had to look at the precepts of the law.
The precedent.
Yeah.
Right. They they made statements to the effect that they would uphold lawful precedent, which is what every judge should do. The question isn't over whether they're going to uphold lawful precedent. The question is, what is lawful precedent? The entirety of the conservative argument against Roe v. Wade, and even pro-abortion legal scholars will admit this, Roe versus Wade is not an exercise of legal judgment. It's an exercise of prudential legislation done by the bench. Roe versus Wade had no basis in law. The Roe v. Wade court made it up out of whole cloth, relying on a precedent that they made up out of whole cloth. So I always tell people, in order to understand Roe versus Wade, you have to go back one further to the 1965 decision in Griswold versus Connecticut, where the Supreme Court held that married couples had a constitutional right to use contraceptives. And they did that based on a right to privacy that's nowhere mentioned in the Constitution, but that the court said they discovered emanating from a penumbra of a guarantee in exactly which amendment they don't know, but it's there somewhere. So basically they picked the result they wanted and shoehorned the law to fit by defining this new right to privacy. Okay? This right to privacy, discovered in Griswold, or made up in Griswold, has been the basis for every decision on abortion as well as homosexual marriage. It's been the basis for Roe versus Wade, for Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and for Obergefell versus Hodges, for Lawrence v. Texas. It's been the basis for all of these cultural rights, or I might just be blunt and say sexual rights, decisions since 1965. So basically Roe v. Wade is a made-up precedent based on a made-up precedent. And that's the heart and soul of the conservative case against, or the conservative legal case, leaving aside the morality of it. That's the heart of the conservative legal case against it. So it's not as though when the judges said that they would uphold lawful precedent, that they're now going back on their word and not upholding lawful precedent. They're just saying, yeah, I said I'd uphold lawful precedent. Roe v. Wade isn't lawful precedent, therefore I'm not bound to uphold it.
Gotcha.
And that's where they're actually doing what they said they were going to do.
Yes, they're doing precisely what they said they were going to do.
And so they are not lying like the one party saying and crying and trying to get riots and people to stand outside their homes, and which is completely wrong. It just, this whole line of thinking, when it comes right down to it, where again it goes back to what we said earlier in the last podcast. My God, you're rattling my God. How dare you?
Exactly, and even pro-abortion advocates realize this side of Roe versus Wade. In fact, one of the most cited law review articles coming out of the Yale Law Journal on this issue, I think it was in 1973, right after Roe v. Wade was decided by J.A. Jelly. He characterized the decision. He said Roe v. Wade is precisely the type of law I would have voted for if I was a legislator. But he said it's not a reasoned judicial opinion. It's an exercise in raw judicial power, and that's a quote from his article.
Wow.
Roe v. Wade is an exercise of raw judicial power. which is not what the Supreme Court was given in the Constitution under Article 3. So even pro-abortion advocates have recognized that Roe v. Wade is on extremely shaky legal ground. And, as a legal precedent, it's garbage. Conservative justices, regardless of their political leanings, have said since it was decided, it's legal garbage, regardless of the morality of it. So that's basically what the impasse is here. One side defines Roe as lawful precedent, the other side doesn't define it as such.
Yeah. So one question that I have that I do want to hear from the more legal expert. So if, and hopefully it does, Roe v. Wade gets struck down, whatever language that is, that doesn't necessarily mean abortions go away.
Right.
That, from my understanding, is that it just kicks it back down to the states.
Well, not necessarily to the states.
Okay.
It takes it out of the realm of the judiciary and puts it in the realm of the legislature.
Okay.
Congress could also pass on this issue. Probably under their vastly bloated Commerce Clause powers, but that's a discussion for another time. Basically, a lot of people think that since Roe v. Wade legalized abortion, overturning Roe v. Wade will make abortion illegal. That's not the case. Roe v. Wade was a prohibition of prohibitions. So if prohibitions are not prohibited, that doesn't mean they're necessarily imposed. So, abortion restrictions are already a checkerboard. There's some states that have very, very loose or no restrictions on abortion, and some states that have pretty narrow restrictions on it. If Roe versus Wade is overturned, the first instance is going to be the state legislatures. They're probably going to be the ones to take it up first, especially given how dysfunctional Congress is lately. But Congress could also pass on it, and I fully expect to see congressional push for, in both directions on this issue, not unlike what we saw in Congress immediately, in the 1850s and before, over the issue of slavery. They weren't content to leave it to the state legislatures to decide. They wanted to do something for the entire country. And on our side of the line, the pro-life people, we view murder of children anywhere as being a dreadful evil that we want to prevent. So I can foresee in the future, our side's going to try to utilize Congress in that regard, and their side's also going to try to use Congress to protect the right of their state legislatures, very much like the Confederate states before the war. They're, ostensibly states' rights, but it's states' rights to legalize abortion, or states' rights to protect slavery. It's a very similar, you're seeing the same exact forces lining up, just on a different issue.
It's already happening, because they did try to push through, it went through the House, and it got to the Senate to legalize abortion in Congress, which got shot down because, they didn't have enough votes.
Because of Joe Manchin.
Yep. Yeah. And
most powerful man in Washington.
Well, let's not say that on this.
All right. Well, when it comes to that part, let my mouth run, but just don't let anybody hear anything. How about that? And then they just listen to what I just said. They'll go, I wonder what he said. Go ahead.
Read your lips.
But you think, seriously, I got a good point here.
No, you do have a good
I have
point.
a good point.
I'm not taking
This
that
man
away.
has stood in the way of a lot of stuff over the last, 2 years.
And now he's getting himself into the way of people who will kill for what they want.
Exactly. So I think you ought to leave that in. But because the lawyer just said.
Okay. You're justified.
Yeah, you're justified. But seriously,
I wouldn't base justification on what a lawyer says if I were you.
No. But think about it though.
But I'm not a lawyer yet anyway.
That's right,
Yeah.
Lost it.
Almost lawyer. How about that? All right. But I just pulled up something real quick. USAbortionClock.org. As of today, since 1973, Roe versus Wade, 63,802,659 abortions have been committed in the United States of America. In the United States today, 1,135 abortions will be committed today. That should show you, in and of itself, God's great mercy and long suffering towards this nation. God should have wiped us off the face of the earth by now. For this, He should have wiped us off the face of the earth. America.
Yeah.
Well, see, there's consequences to that, because when we think about 63 million individuals that could have been alive, out of those 63 million individuals, what if God was going to bless the intellect of one to find the cure for cancer, the cure for some of these other things that would be helpful for us? And so we're going to see the consequences of this, because we'll never know what would be. Mm-hmm. Now God does.
Oh yeah.
And I'm almost certain that when we get into heaven, that if we ask Him, He might have said, yeah, the cure for cancer was with that child, but the parents didn't want him.
In a lot of ways, maybe get in trouble for saying this, probably offend some people, but in a ways, that's God's punishment on us.
Yeah.
For taking those lives.
Yeah.
I don't think you're wrong. That part of God's punishment on us today is we, by we I mean we as a society, have killed potentially a really good righteous president that we will never have, and that's our punishment.
Well, also too, I think the whole "you reap what you sow" scripture comes into
Amen.
to
Galatians
play
6.
here. I think we are reaping what we have sown. I think God's judgment obviously is being meted out towards the United States of America, especially over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And we're seeing it more and more, as Sam said earlier. I can call you Sam, right?
I've been called a lot worse.
Yeah. So anyways. But Romans 1, right?
Yeah.
Think about Romans 1. And God has given us over. And I mean over, I'm talking about nationally, a reprobate mind. Mm-hmm. And I think that is His judgment.
Yeah.
Would you prefer God's slow judgment, which we're definitely seeing right now, or would you rather see God's swift judgment, being a couple of nukes dropped on us from another country?
Part of me says, as someone assured of my salvation, I would rather see the swift one.
Just hit
but
hit
at the same time, because
we're under God's judgment.
Yeah.
There is no doubting.
Yeah.
That we have entered into a time of reprobation.
Absolutely.
With our mindset here in this country.
Yeah.
When you have literally hundreds of thousands of people screaming in the streets for their right to kill their child, that is a reprobate mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, that is a reprobate mind. That is a mind that hates God. Hates God.
Well, Peter writes, and he says, dear friends, don't let this one thing escape you. With the Lord, one day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. The Lord does not delay His promise, as some understand delay, but is patient with you, not wanting any to perish, but all to come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and on that day the heavens will pass away with a loud noise, and the elements will burn and be dissolved in the earth, and the works on it will be disclosed. Peter writes that and says that God is showing mercy and grace and kindness by His delay. Mm-hmm. But I agree with you. Since I'm secure in my salvation, I would hate to see anybody go to hell. I really would.
Absolutely.
But that's the only thing that keeps me from preferring the
swift.
Yeah.
But being present with the Lord, that's the best place to be.
Amen.
As Lieutenant Ripley said in Aliens 2. Nuke it all and leave it for bear. That's the only way you can be sure.
I think that's a good place to stop there.
Wait, hold on. I'm glad you're not president.
That's awesome. All right, friends, I think we've had a really good conversation. Sammy, I want to thank you so much for joining us on these episodes. And, of course, Scott and Ryan, thank you. And hopefully we look forward to seeing you all in the near future. Take care.